Every generation faces threats to its security, its freedom, its way of life. How we perceive these threats, how we respond to them, shapes who we are and what we value. Not long ago, Nike Missile Site SF88 was the final line of defense during the Cold War, a last-ditch effort to save us from nuclear annihilation.
As a Nike soldier, our job was to destroy incoming Russian aircraft.
I was a launch officer on a nuclear weapons facility at the north end of the Golden Gate Bridge.
They knew going in that should they actually be active, it was a one-way trip.
When the battle station siren sounds, you have 23 minutes to live.
In the years following World War II, the United States entered an era of unprecedented growth and prosperity. But even as we celebrated the end of one global conflict, international tensions were already on the rise.
After World War II, I think it's fair to say everybody hoped for an era of world peace. Unfortunately, the world divided into two opposing armed camps. One side was the United States and its allies, the other side was the Soviet Union and its communist system and allies. They competed for domination across the entire planet.
Both sides were deeply distrustful of one another, certain the other was plotting its destruction.
An aggressor in possession of the effective minimum number of atomic bombs for a surprise attack could probably place a sufficient number of his bombs on the chosen targets to cause hideous damage.
It was a period of particularly high tension because World War II ended with an atomic bomb.
The atomic bomb explodes over Nagasaki, Japan. Viewed from the air, the city is just one tremendous area of ruin.
The next nuclear attack wouldn't take place in faraway lands, but in our cities. New York, Chicago, Washington, San Francisco. Despite efforts to pursue peace, the Americans and Soviets developed more and more powerful nuclear weapons, knowing full well the destruction they could unleash. By the 1960s, nuclear bombs were 80 times larger than the ones dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. If a single nuclear missile reached San Francisco, it could flatten the entire Bay Area. The United States and Soviet Union's race for military and nuclear superiority defined the global landscape for decades and would become known as the Cold War.
Growing up during the Cold War was very frightening.
That feeling of potential doom in the background was kind of always there.
My brothers and I were at home with our baby sister, and we heard thunder, but we didn't know it was thunder. So we thought that they were getting ready to bomb. So we got under the kitchen table, and we were there until our mother came home.
I remember Bert the Turtle. And Bert the Turtle would come on TV and say, "Hey, kiddies, this is what you have to do."
Duck and cover, duck and cover, duck and cover.
The Cold War and the threat that nuclear weapons posed caused the United States to adopt a new defensive strategy called Mutually Assured Destruction, or MAD for short.
Mutually assured destruction relied, I guess, on the psychology that even though we think we can destroy you, we don't want to be destroyed ourselves.
We knew they had it. They knew we had it. Nobody wanted to push a button. Mutually assured destruction was the key. Nobody was going to be able to raise a flag at the end.
In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the existential threat of nuclear annihilation to every home in America.
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
Since the early days of the Cold War, the United States government had been preparing for events like the Cuban Missile Crisis, spending trillions of dollars in the preceding decades on a vast defensive network. This included nearly 300 Nike missile sites, just like the ones in the Golden Gate National Recreation Area.
We were the last line of defense around the major cities that we were defending. Only if the Russian aircraft slipped through the Air Force were we called upon to fire.
When I was 19 years old, I was launch officer. Imagine my mother's astonishment when she arrived here and she realized that that was my job.
I described the duty being 99% boredom and 1% panic. And what we did was to train our troops to be ready for the panic moment.
Every step you took, every test you made had to be exact, it had to be perfect.
If we were informed of an incoming enemy aircraft, we had maybe 15 to 30 minutes to get ready to fire.
Each system used an expendable missile, radar controlled from the ground to the target. The technique is called command guidance.
I think Nike would have essentially shot down almost all Soviet bombers who were bent on attacking the United States. I can't be certain. And the problem really is that, one, getting through is way too much.
No one in my community was really aware. I was raised just over the hill and never knew it existed.
The Nike system served as a warning to the Soviet Union that we had weapons to combat them as they did us.
As long as they knew that all of our major cities were surrounded by surface-to-air missile batteries, they would have to rethink the premise of their attack.
In 1974, with Nike missiles no longer an effective defense against the Soviet Union, Site SF88, along with others, was shut down. In 1989, the Soviet Union, unable to afford the arms race, collapsed, and the Cold War came to an end. So what is the legacy of these Nike missile sites?
This Nike site is historically significant because for 30 or 40 years, it was the very symbol of the Cold War.
The threats that were faced during that time period, the decisions that were made during that time period, was it right? Was it wrong? Was it worth it?
We spent a lot of money on missiles we never fired. And was that a bad investment? I don't happen to think it was.
They never had to fire a missile.
Maybe it did work, but I wish there was another way to go about it.
Maybe we can learn by the mistakes of ourselves and others and have a more peaceful union in the years ahead. And that's what we do as National Park interpreters, to tell the stories.
Each generation faces its own challenges. Threats from abroad and from within. Environmental crises and a changing climate. How we respond to these threats shapes and defines what we believe in and who we are. Then and now.